Thanks for tuning into the Replatform podcast. It's myself, James Gerd, and my co-host, Paul Rogers. How are you doing today, buddy?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Yeah, good. Bit tired after I went to the Suede gig last night in Ali Pali, and it's a long drive, so my eyes are kind of partly bleeding today. But apart from that, it's all good.
That's right. Yeah, I know the feeling. I'm pretty knackered today. But
yeah. Default state on the Replatform podcast. Cool. Let's set up an introduction to our guest today. And for anyone who's tuning in for the first time to the podcast, thanks for listening. We hope you enjoy it. Please do subscribe, because then you'll get alerts, and we do a new episode every week, all things to do with e-commerce, CX and technology. So our topic today is around Maplin's technology stack for e-commerce. So Maplin's a much-loved UK brand. It's got an absolutely a crazily large product catalogue and really diverse audience, actually. It's a brand I've shopped with loads and loads over the years. It's now online only, having shuttered the stores, and we're going to get under the hood to explore how and why the brand's using Magento to power its e-commerce operations. So first of all, welcome to the podcast, Ollie Marshall. How are you doing?
Brilliant. Good to meet you.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. This is going to be a really interesting chat for a lot of people, because a lot of people will know Maplin as its stores, and now it's online only focus. So, and you've got an interesting business model. So before we start asking you annoying questions, can you let people know what you do and how you've come to own the Maplin brand?
Yeah. So as you said, my name's Ollie Marshall. I'm the managing director of Digital First Retail, and we own and operate two websites, Maplin Electronics and Office Outlet. So Maplin, many people know and love the name, probably shopped in the stores. Fortunately, I went into administration back in 2018. And coming from my background of supply and distribution, we basically got ourselves into an opportunity where we could acquire the Maplin Electronics brand. So we bought the brand name, and the goal was, let's take this thing online only, fundamentally. And this is the same for Office Outlet actually as well. Fundamentally, they're fantastic businesses in a great market, in a great category. But, as everyone knows, bricks and mortar, it's a tough business. Maplin had a lot of problems, somewhat unique to it, but timing, Brexit, and all the various things that come with it, and meant it just wasn't sustainable in bricks and mortar, and that's why it went in the direction it did. But bringing it online, we still have the same tagline: the electronic specialist. Office Outlet is powering the future of work. We're trying to still fulfill exactly their original premise, just online, with a great customer experience. More products, if anything. We are based on a distributed supply chain, which basically means that we can list a huge number of products, which means we can go really specialist. Something I actually tell my team a lot is, I'd rather we stitch together 1,000 niches than go after, the big mainstream product lines that, you could buy anywhere. So that's kind of our introduction. Me personally, I'm a software developer by trade. So I have very much come from it as an operations and technology background. And, as we'll talk about a bit later, I'm very into the tech.
Great. So I'll kind of ask the first question and also set the scene a little bit. So Ollie and I went for breakfast maybe like 3 months ago, something like that, 2-3 months ago. And we were just talking about Magento and e-com generally. And I guess I started the conversation, maybe a little bit of negativity around some of my recent experiences with Magento and some level of frustration, I guess. And you had the opposite view, and, you were pretty positive. And I was really impressed with kind of how you've got to the point you've got to with Magento and kind of how you're using the platform. So maybe just to start off with, if you give us a bit of an introduction to your tech stack and how you are using Magento.
Yeah. So I think I've come into e-commerce at probably a reasonably good time. So one thing worth saying, when, I kicked off the whole project, which was back in June 2018, we went live in January 2019. Over that 6-month period, I took a bit of time to look at what Maplin and Office Outlet had done previously. And, brilliant people there, but legacy is an absolute killer when it comes to technology. Whereas I had the opportunity to really take a look at the market and the landscape and start from fresh. So Magento, as you've rightly said, is exactly what we picked. Couple of reasons for that. One, I needed the flexibility of something that I could get under the hood with, customize, but also something that was still, not too bespoke, still a vendor product, and ultimately something that I could get hosted pretty easily. So we work with Magento Cloud. So we use PaaS, or Magento's platform as a service. So they fully host it on AWS for us. But still, fundamentally, I have a Git repo connected to that environment, and I can write whatever PHP, get under the hood, SSH onto the boxes if we need to. So when we stepped into it, we got onto Magento 2.1, I think 2.2 came out fairly. So, still relatively early, one for Magento 2 and 2 for Magento Cloud. I think we were one of their very early customers on that. And, we've really seen that platform transform. But my approach has very much been around technology is a competitive advantage for us. As a business, we're multi-brand, we have lots of products, and therefore a simple website, a D2C, dare I say, sort of a more simple D2C website hosted on Shopify just won't allow us to be able to embrace technology as our competitive advantage, basically. So that, as well as I'm a software developer, I can really get under the hood myself. Something like Magento, really gave me that flexibility. So and so that's sort of the first part of it. That was kind of why I stuck with Magento. Then also, and this sort of comes to the Headless and some of the future plans we've got, I could also see that Magento was moving in that direction, even though at that time it was still probably too early. Or it definitely was too early, but I could see that there was a nice pathway to go from a monolithic Magento deployment with a theme and, your standard infrastructure onto a PWA and a Headless. And I can probably speak about that in a bit. But yeah, so Magento, it was still a pick that I had to make quite early on and quite quickly, but it has ended up playing out that I'm very positive on it, and it has fit within my culture, within my team, within our skills, and ultimately can be our competitive advantage.
I do think you seem to benefit from, obviously you're running the company, you're technical by trade, you've been involved with Magento for a while, and I think that probably works to your advantage. And one of the things that impressed me most, I guess, so I always encourage clients to avoid customizing anything in Magento, I guess, or adapting things to how Magento should be used. And it feels like you've really adopted that. The way that you've kind of taken things out of the platform in certain places, etc., I think makes for a better experience. Is that something that you've just learned over the years, or is that something where you have had pain when you started with Magento? Like, how have you got to that point where I know you kind of you talked about sticking to Magento checkout, sticking to vanilla Magento as much as humanly possible? How have you kind of ended up doing that?
Yeah, I think there's two parts to that answer. So one, referencing, I think I was a bit lucky in terms of timing, because when we started, I could see the Headless and the PWA approach just coming through. So I knew I wanted a pathway to that, even if it was still a bit early. So I always sort of had this mindset of let's stay as stock as possible, because ultimately Magento will become an API to us in that future. So ultimately, I'm not going to put that down to me being a genius and forecasting the future. It was just kind of there. And then the second part of it was when we got going, we obviously had to build a retailer from scratch and everything that comes with it. Tech, people, products, suppliers, you name it. And I had 6 months to do it. So as part of our technology, I kind of split it into two areas. Front office and back office. The front office is, what you guys, particularly in the world you're in, Magento and the Ecommerce platform and the websites, and some other stuff we use, Signified for fraud, Gorgeous for customer service, Algolia for search. But then the bigger component actually for us is our back office, which is what manages our supply chain. All of that is bespoke and in-house. So we use C#, ASP.NET for that type of infrastructure. And that's really, the meaty part of my background. And that basically manages our ability to do about 70% of our orders are fulfilled by third parties. So I actually didn't, how to word this. So because we had so much to do on that, just to get the business going, on the back office, just to get the business going, I had less time to allocate to Magento and the front office. That is something that we're trying to turn around now. And, you know, there's a lot to improve and to do going forward on Magento and our new PWA site that's coming. But basically, we spent more time on the back office, which just fundamentally meant I didn't have enough resources to start customizing and going too deep on Magento. And that is kind of where we are today. We're really starting to pivot our attention into the front office. And I've just kind of been in a somewhat lucky position in that we haven't overly customized Magento.
So you've built an in-house development team versus using like outsourcing it to agencies, which is the standard. I'm fascinated by this because the standard approach when you've got a short project timeframe and complexity is outsource it, get an agency, they'll do all the development work and the heavy lifting. But it feels like you obviously identified the benefit of building in-house. And what drove that? Was it the back office need that drove it, or was it something else that made you think in-house is a way to go here?
So I think because I'm a developer myself, I'm just so hugely biased towards doing it myself because I want to get in the nitty gritty. You know, I obviously I'm involved in all areas of the business, marketing, trading, customer services. Yeah, I still do code reviews on a daily basis. So for me, an agency is just not particularly a route I want to go down or ever want to go. Well, not ever, wanted to go down at the time, just because I don't want to hand it off. One of the key reasons for that, I think, though, is because one, I'm technical and can do it in-house, but secondly, we really see our technology as a competitive advantage to us. And therefore, if I just outsource a competitive advantage, that doesn't necessarily make a huge amount of sense. But having said that, we do work with freelancers. So when in that June 2018, just after we acquired the name, I had a lot to do. So I did actually go out and find a freelancer, or a small group of freelancers actually, run by a guy called Paul Collins of Layer 5 Solutions, really good guy. And I basically could say to him, hey, here are some wireframes, go build. But I was still part of the code review and the daily check-ins and the weekly check-ins and was involved. So he was kind of a surrogate to the team. That's the word. An implant actually is probably a better word. An implant to the team, yet he was separate. So I think I found that, there are that three ways of doing it: in-house plus with freelancers and agency. And I think sort of the in-house and the in-house plus works for me. One mindset thing I think I found with in-house versus freelancers is still fundamentally a freelancer can feel like a team member, but equally still feels like they're on their own and they got to self-motivate and self-manage. Whereas an in-house, I think naturally, being an employee, people fall back on that management structure. So I think depending on the phase of the business, what the task is at hand, how complicated it is, if that project can be boxed off with, set requirements, as the Magento theme was at the time, the two models are kind of interchangeable for me.
A kind of related question on that is, what is your internal team? Which skills? 'Cause one of the challenges I've seen in fast growth brands is they want to build out an internal engineering function, but it's hugely competitive space, and getting like lead engineers and having all of the right solutions architecture skills is a real challenge and a cost. So what I'd love to hear, what roles do you have in-house versus the what you've used with freelancers?
Yeah, so we're definitely more weighted on the back office, because that again is even more so our competitive advantage of our technology than maybe the front office. So we're definitely heavier weighted there. We're a development team of 5. It really helps that I can take that lead role. One from a cost, but also just from a strategy and getting in the weeds. We've started hiring more developers that are slightly more senior, which is great. That definitely takes a bit of the burden off me. But I also do quite like to home grow junior developers, and for good or bad, I have a way of doing things. I'm a little bit OCD when it comes to code bases, so that can slow us down a little bit, but it can be quite good to train up junior developers and get them into a space where, you know, they're highly productive within a few months. So I think it's really dependent on what my role is, and also how much time I have to put in. But to answer your question, at the moment we're currently, of that 3 main developers on C#, 1 on React, and / a little bit of the PHP for Magento. Really, it should be a 50-50 split, I think, though.
Yeah, so it sounds like the initial priority was all the back office stuff, because you said you built out custom back office for all the supply chain stuff, which is a critical element, because if that's not working, it doesn't matter how good the front end is. But yeah, so the balance will change. Interesting. And you said you're on enterprise cloud, and I think this is a really nice thing to kind of clarify to people listening. So a lot of people sit there and think, well, hang on a minute, do I need enterprise, or could I get the community and not pay a license fee and use that money in other areas of the business? So what drove enterprise versus community? Is it the trade, the B2B side, or is that other elements of the benefits of enterprise that gave you a good business case?
It's a good question. To be honest, are we using a lot of enterprise features? We're not using many at this moment. Staging is a nice one, or scheduling, not essential, but we do use it because we have it. B2B, we're not using. We would like to, but we're not. To be honest, the main reasoning for going enterprise for us was because we wanted to outsource the hosting. So we wanted to use Magento Cloud. And for right or wrong, Magento's internal, the way that, and this has probably shifted around in the years, but because I know their strategy is, you know, definitely changing a lot of the time, and the community around community, the developer community around community is definitely, you know, up in arms a little bit at the moment. There's changes. Anyway, the way I see enterprise is I get it for free because I pay for Magento Cloud and their hosting. So when I went to them and I said, tried it out, I said, I want to host it myself. I'm going to, you know, create whatever infrastructure on AWS and do it myself. They said, okay, well, you know, enterprise license happens to be the exact same cost as Magento Cloud. And I went, okay, well, may as well stick with Magento Cloud then. So it depends on the way you look at it. But for right or wrong, Magento is trying to move towards this hosted environment, which just happens to work for us anyway. So I kind of could give or take with the enterprise features, but the hosted and the support is what I'm paying for. And, you know, I think is a good offer and a good deal, and we really like it. And I've definitely seen them really up their game over the last 2 years.
We talked a little bit about this before we started recording. So PIM and Akinio, and again, it's another a good example of where you've taken something out of Magento, which gives you a bit more freedom. And obviously, there's benefits to using a PIM generally, but equally good practice to take something like this out of the platform when you've got a catalog like yours. How are you using Akinio at the moment, and I know you said, you know, you want to get a lot more of it out of it in the future, and, you know, you've obviously got a small team and there's work to do there. Like, talk to us about why you decided to go with an external PIM and what the plan is there.
Yeah. So rightly said, we use it, Akinio. We've actually previously been using Akinio Community for a long time, hosted on premise. They don't offer that on-premise option anymore. So it's somewhat similar sort of progress actually to Magento in terms of it's going to a SaaS hosted model. We are currently migrating over to the cloud. We are not there at the moment. But to answer your questions around the motivation, product data is obviously critical for e-commerce. It's an area we're lacking in, being completely candid. And we've got a lot of work there to do. And part of moving to Akinio Cloud and connecting it properly to Magento is really going to up our game. But for us, we've got a big catalog. Technology products have a huge number of specs, for example, to go with it, and all sorts of information. So for us to really offer a really good shopping experience, we need good product information. And, Magento is not a best in breed PIM, let's face it. So it's kind of been a no-brainer for us to use an external PIM. Also, some advantages are we can do things like connecting external data sources to PIM to help us enrich it, so we don't have to build a huge product team. Again, project even ongoing, but hopefully we'll get there, and it will really yield a lot of results, I think.
Sorry, just quickly, could you give an example of like an external data set that you've identified specific to your need that will help that enrichment?
Yeah, so there's a couple of companies. IceCat is a source we're not using, but they're big in the consumer electronics space. One that we are going to start working with very shortly is called One World Sync. They actually just changed their name from CNET Content Solutions, I believe. And then they've been acquired. They're now called One World Sync Content Syndication, I think. So they have a native integration into Akeneo, which is great. Again, less software for us to have to build and less integrating to do. One of the slight worries about using product data sources is, things like SEO and duplicate content. Well, what if we're all using the same product data? That is a challenge we have to overcome. But if a camera is black and it's sold on many websites, we all need that one attribute, and it's not subjective. It's a fact. So that can be syndicated out. So for us, it's about using Akeneo to help us store that data, be able to push that to Magento, to be able to push that onto the website, and then creating a good experience for our internal teams to manage the data.
That makes sense. And I guess on the same principle, in terms of kind of, separating systems out from a kind of like, best in class kind of composable route. You've talked about going headless. What is the driver behind that, and what is your plan now? What stack do you plan to use? What's the goal there?
Yeah, so almost from day one, I've known we want to go headless. My development experience prior to that has always been very service orientated in banking and in other e-commerce projects. So for me, headless was an obvious one. You rightly say there is some really great benefits from it. So for example, you can start to decouple that front end from any specific e-commerce engine or any of the other services. And the approach that I've very much taken is, let's find best in breed services for each of the components we need. So commerce is obviously Magento for us. We brought in a CMS called Storyblock, but there's other ones, Contentful, long list of them. They're all popping up in the same time. And we've got, what's some other ones? Algolia for search and recommendations. We work with Revu on reviews, Signified on fraud, and Calculates on shipping. And really the idea here of going headless is going, let's build a new application. We call it Elvis, because it's our presentation layer, Elvis Presently. And what Elvis is about is being a React app built on another framework called Next.js to give us a load of really cool benefits like server-side rendering, image optimization, built by an awesome company called Versil. And then we just start to use each of these services for their specific parts of the website. And naturally, you just get a lot of developer productivity improvements out of it, because now when you want to make a little change to a button, you don't have to redeploy Magento and start building the PHP app. You can just go, okay, well, let's push up a code change for just this one part of the system. Again, you just naturally get less vendor lock-in. Again, when those partners, those services that we've selected, all great services. I don't see us needing to change them in the short term, but definitely we have that ability to separate it out within that code base. So we could plug and play with a different CMS or a different commerce engine if we need to in the future. And then naturally with headless, I think there's just been so much development in this space, so many improvements to the paradigm, the technologies, the services. Just a lot of brain power, I think, has gone into this type of model now. There's just some really awesome features out there. For example, I just mentioned server-side rendering really solves a load of problems around SEO, image optimization, getting those page insight scores or Lighthouse scores up for Google. Things like image optimization come out of the box, where you can start just sending the specific type of image size, because Next will cut up all those images, host them in the CDN, and then deliver the right thing. Another really cool benefit of Next, which has gone out of my head, no, here it is we're combining, they call it like hybrid. So for example, when we build our website, things like our About Us page don't change very often anyway. So in our CMS, we don't really need to be calling that data from that database every page load of About Us. So Next.js allows you to do things like statically building your website for some parts and then dynamically fetching data for other parts. So for example, our About Us page is statically built, and we might build that site every deployment. That might be once a day or once a week. And then that's just served as HTML to the client. So it's super fast, like very, very rapid, straight out of the CDN, doesn't touch a database or an application layer. Versus our product pages are going to Magento, going, what's the title, what's the image, what's the price, stock level. And you get this really cool combination of like a hybrid static versus dynamic single page application. And we've just seen that it can create some really, really fast and interesting experiences if you can nail that.
So it's set up as an SPA at the moment, is it?
Not at the moment. So okay. Elvis is not quite live yet. We're still using that monolithic Magento theme. And this has been the bane of my life for the last 8 months. So it's coming. And it's coming soon.
Coming soon. Front near you. That's interesting. What made you go, because you referenced PWA before, and you can have an SPA that's not PWA, but let's demystify this for people. So what's the attraction of the SPA route? Because one of the challenges with SPAs and JavaScript is the initial load can be heavier, but then the subsequent experience is so lightning fast because it's all preloaded. So what was the attraction of an SPA approach for you?
So I think the way I think about it is really making that front end layer a separate application and a separate code base. And because of that, it needs to be its own application that sends its JavaScript to the browser and it renders. To reference your specific challenge there around like long load times for the initial page, actually, there has been so many improvements here. So I really recommend people go look at things like Nuxt or Next.js, or there's tons of these frameworks out. They really address a lot of those problems. So for us, server-side rendering solves that exact thing that you say. The actual compilation is done on the server, yet we still get the benefits of JavaScript and React. So to answer your question, ultimately, it's all about creating a better experience for our customers, but also a better experience for ourselves when developing, so that we can really push it ahead and start offering unique features that other retailers aren't. And to do that, really, the Headless and React is the way that we can achieve that, basically.
Cool, thanks. And you, because we talked about, you take some stuff out of the platform, you try and keep it to the core. So obviously there's advantages of not overly customized stuff, but you stuck with native Magento checkout. I'd love to hear what made you do that, because checkout's one of those areas that can go completely wrong. Is that the reason? Is it just peace of mind of knowing that you haven't messed with the checkout?
Yeah, it's part that, and the other part is integration. So the way I think about checkout is really it should be commodity. It should be as familiar to people as any other website. If anything, we should have one set of best practices that globally all e-commerce websites, use. I don't really see any reason why we should be innovating around the checkout except making it very quick and very familiar. So for us, by taking just a Magento native checkout, hopefully Magento, I think they have some improvements to make around checkout, but hopefully that is going to come over the next sort of couple of quarters. And then we'll just automatically benefit from that as we do a version update. The second part is the integration. So things like payment gateway, fraud, shipping options, all these kind of areas. We really don't want to be building that customly ourselves. It really makes no sense. It's not a competitive advantage to us. So therefore, by just being able to plug in an extension we're off. And the reality is most gateways, most providers that we talk to have a Magento extension straight away. So it really saves a lot of time and effort there.
Yeah, interesting. You mentioned Signify because we talked about a few third parties, and a lot of people think don't grasp what the benefit of a specific fraud management is versus we've got a modern gateway that's PSD2 compliant and does SCA, etc. What is the added value to you of having a specific fraud management tool alongside your standard payment gateway?
Yeah, so I think my experience has been payment gateways are not enough. They don't do a good enough job around fraud management, for one. So it was basically very obvious to me straight away that we need to do something. As you say, PSD2 and the SCA and all this stuff is going to start to, I think, maybe slightly diminish the need for a separate tool, just because naturally the security is more hardened. But the core pitch of a Signified is we're going to help you generate more revenue by allowing more orders through. So Signified was, one, enabled us to outsource fraud. And I just got to say on day one, fraud is not my problem. If there is any fraud, Signified will pay out for it. So it meant we were able to grow really fast and really just throw everything at it. Because I think something that's underappreciated is that e-commerce there is risk every time you make an order. Yeah. Because that risk is not very visible and it's not very well publicized, but it is there because the customer who's paid on a card can raise a chargeback up to like 90 days or 180 or whatever it is. It's a long time. And if we sell £1 million worth of stuff in a month, I'm on the hook for that £1 million up. Well, obviously not all of it's going to be fraud. I hope not. You're on the hook for that for a long period of time. So if you overtrade, you could leave yourself exposed. So Signified allowed us to just not think about it. And it's definitely enabled us to grow. I think it is going to change, sort of referencing your points going forward. But I like to at least sort of turn the fraud management off as best I can on the gateways and then leave Signified to make those optimization decisions.
And what impact? Because I've spoken to the guys at Signify a lot. They really like what they say because it's not just about fraud; it's about acceptance rates, like you said. What impact have you seen? That for me, the best business case of this is the increased acceptance rates.
Yeah. I mean, we basically turned Signified on from pretty much day one. So I never got to see, like, whenever they come to me and they say, "Hey, Ollie, like, let's do a case study together," and they go, "So what was the uplift?" I go, "Well, we kind of used you from day one, so I don't know. I don't have any reference for it."
Okay, fair enough.
But my understanding, my belief at least, is that, it's done well for us. And we're at 90+%, 98 or 97% acceptance, which is, when I look at some orders, I had this one example, like quite early on, where we had someone from Saudi Arabia in Riyadh ordering audio cables, delivering to Knightsbridge. If I'd looked at that, I would have said, no way is that a legit order. There's just no way. That customer has turned out to be one of our highest value VIP customers because, that whoever this person is not very price sensitive and is ordering and loves audio.
Saudi Arabia and Knightsbridge, that's part of the royal family.
I don't know. I don't look into my customers like that, unfortunately. But Signified, the moral of that story is that Signified accepted that first order, flagged it a little bit orange, but because it was a low enough threshold, they were okay with it. And then that order is just the orders have just kept coming, and now they've got a great track record, and now Signified will let it through. But I would have never even given it a chance probably from day one.
Makes sense. So my last question, before James asks the final question. Obviously, we talked about some of the kind of practices you followed with Magento and your kind of general approach and how, you've avoided customization and you've ended up in, a pretty good position in terms of like agility and ability to kind of, release new features quickly and everything else. What advice do you have for other people on Magento that have maybe gone through a slightly different experience and have maybe, they're not in the kind of position you're in with the platform?
It's a good question. I mean, I take a very pragmatic approach to this stuff. I really don't believe for the most part that, you know, whether you pick Magento, whether you pick Shopify, whether you pick BigCommerce, it's not going to be the make or break, you know, to your business. I don't believe that. So I do think, you know, whether you have problems with your platform, yeah, maybe you would like to move a bit quicker, but I do think I would like to see examples where that's really holding you back. So for us, as I said earlier, I really focused on what are our competitive advantages. For us, the website and the technology was. That was why we went the Magento route. If you're a D2C site and you've got a small selection of products, it's probably not the right selection for you or the right platform for you. My advice would very much be, take stock, look at it. You don't need every software platform under the sun, no matter what the vendor tells you, will not solve all your problems. And switching on recommendations or this new CRM tool is not going to change your life, I don't think. Well, it might do, but I don't think it is. So my view would be, look at everything, try and see where can you make the most impact. You know, if your web platform is really struggling, maybe you can swap it out. Maybe you can start making small tweaks, such as moving towards a headless approach, and then you start having less reliance on this single thing that's causing you problems. So be it your commerce product. If you can slowly divest your reliance on that, I think you'll put yourself in a much better position. I think I was fortunate in that I have a technology background. I was able to always consider what my get out plan was. I definitely take a bit of a pessimistic view as to whenever any software vendor tries to sell me some magic. I'm always thinking, well, I'll give it a go, but what's my get out plan? And yes, we probably are quite reliant on Magento today, but that's actually going to start to diffuse over time. And then we're going to really own our own destiny, I think, around where we go. And my advice would be, think about the longer term plan, how you can get to that position, as opposed to, there's this glitzy new thing over here, this new platform that's just come out that apparently is amazing. I would really call them out on that and start to look at, is it really? Well, with what you've got, like, how can you change that? How can you get into a better position? It's probably not that much better. But that does take a little bit of time, and you've got to really, really understand where your competitive advantages come from.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice way to close out and frame this episode. Is, you know, our whole approach we say all the time is no platform is 100% perfect, but knowing what your selection criteria are and what the competitive advantages you can get from a platform and choosing accordingly and appreciating it's not going to be a perfect fit is really important. I really enjoyed this. I really appreciate you taking the time to share insights. And I think our audience have got a lot from this, learning about how you've taken on the brand and how you've changed it from a technical point of view. So thanks for taking the time.
No problem.
And big thanks, as always, to everyone who's listened in. Keep an ear out for next episodes and let us know of any topics you'd like us to cover or guests you'd like us to feature. But do tell us why, so we understand what you're interested in. And if you haven't subscribed already, please do, or give us a rating on Apple, Spotify. It helps cheer us up every day to see people liking what we're doing. Take care and have a nice day. For more information on this topic, head over to replatform.fm for our audio podcasts. To discuss a project, or if you'd like to chat about any of the topics covered in this episode in more detail, please reach out to myself, James Gurd, or my co-host Paul Rogers via LinkedIn and Twitter. Thanks again for listening, and keep your ears peeled for the next episode.